What are labor traps? Labor traps are basically the myths and misconceptions that you have for labor when it comes to planning your birth and also when you're going through the labor process. These are the things that often derail a physiological birth or undermine your confidence or otherwise trick you into fearing something that you don't actually need to fear, or that your body isn't working, or that you're more likely to agree to interventions. Why am I talking about this? Because it's induction season. And with induction season comes cesarean season. This is the time of year when a lot of care providers start pushing induction and handing it out like candy canes. They will tell you your baby's too big, your baby's too small, you have low fluid, you have too much fluid, we won't have enough beds, so you should probably book labor. You might not be able to get in because we have a policy that's like you need to induce by a certain point, and we're going to drop you from care if you don't induce by 42 weeks. All kinds of things that they're just basically trying to get you to agree to an induction. And one of the most insidious ways is when they tell you at 39 weeks that you're not dilating, or you get to your 40-week appointment and you're not dilating, or you get to your 41-week appointment and you're not dilating. So that is a natural birth trap. And I've talked about that before when I was talking about natural birth traps last month. And the thing is that all of this comes down to one thing. When you fall into a trap within the maternity care system, what it basically means is that you have either heard from the cultural context of birth that's not supporting physiological birth and not allowing you to tap into your intuition, or telling you that your intuition is wrong, or you're getting the medical pressure from the medical system that actually profits on you being afraid, on you doubting your ability to birth without their help. Because the truth is that a physiological birth is a process that your body will do no matter what. It is designed to birth. We don't even think about it for anything else. It's not like we go to the doctor and say, hey, doctor, when am I going to sneeze? Do I have signs of sneezing? No, we don't have that. Same thing for going to the toilet. Same thing. You go to the bathroom and you just expect it to happen. You fall asleep. You just expect it to happen. But when it comes to birth, we've pathologized it. We've now made it a medical event, and it was never meant to be that. There's a whole historical context of how the hell we got in this mess in the first place. You can check it out with Rachel Reed's book, Reclaiming Childbirth as a Rite of Passage. You often are not going to know that this is a trap. This is something that's taught in mainstream. It's something that you're going to be expected to believe by your care provider. Your care provider is following this model. Remember, your care provider has been indoctrinated into a medical system. Even if they're a midwife, they still have certain guidelines that they have to follow. The problem with guidelines, though, is that they're usually set up with a consensus of the governing medical, the governing medical body, like the experts, who all have to agree before they change a guideline. And the thing is that they're not going to want to just change something if it's already working for them. They're looking at reducing the risk to them, and it's the short-term risk. So when they're pushing interventions, it's to get you through the system. If you want to avoid that, then you want to avoid these labor traps. Labor trap number 6 is labor stages. Okay, so you've heard this: early labor, active labor, transition, and pushing, correct? You've heard about this. But what you may not realize is that those stages, while it's helpful for the medical system to look at that in little sections, that is not actually how birth works. If that was how birth actually worked, we wouldn't have so many problems when it comes to people not progressing at the rate that they're supposed to. It's not that your body's broken, it's that the system is very narrow in their definition of what a labor stage is. So you could have a very early labor where you dilate to maybe 6 centimeters. but it still feels like early labor to you. The contractions are so spaced apart and they're mild. And then all of a sudden, you could just ramp up and skip transition and go straight to pushing. Labor is not a linear process. If it was, then labor would never stall out if something happened, such as you get into active labor, you get to 6 centimeters, they give you a cervical check, you get scared, or you've been laboring for a while and you're tired, and all of a sudden things shut down again. That doesn't mean your body's broken. That means that the idea of labor stages is crap. Okay? The other thing I've noticed with labor stages is people will say, oh, well, this is when you get to 6 centimeters and then 7 centimeters and 8 centimeters, and that's transition. And then when you last few centimeters is when you're pushing, or they'll say it in a way it's like 0 to 3 centimeters is early labor. It depends on who you talk to and what they consider labor stages. I have a different definition. So I actually talk about this inside your Empowered Birth workshop, which you can get on my site, empoweringmomsbirth.com/shop. And I talk about this a lot inside your Empowered Birth, which is available on my website, empoweringmomsbirth.com/book. But what happens is that when you actually recognize the true labor stages, you realize it's a process, and that process can go back and forth as much as you need. So I call this the warm-up stage. And that's when things are starting to kick in. Maybe you're starting to feel a little crampy and your body is signaling, let's go somewhere quiet. Let's go somewhere where nobody's disturbing us, and let's get into our trance. Let's rest. Before that is what I call the prodromal, or very early hinting labor stages, where maybe things are starting to ramp up. Maybe you're getting a few contractions. Maybe you're starting to feel like you need to go and retreat and go rest. And this is where a lot of people get it wrong, because they think, oh, contractions are starting. I should probably go and make them stronger. I should do some walking. I should do some acupuncture. I should go and have sex with my partner. I should find ways to get things moving. You don't want to do that. What you want to do instead is go rest, because your body is actually signaling, hey, we need to get to a safe place, because if we're out in the middle of nowhere and there's a tiger around, it's not going to be safe to birth. So we need to get to our cave. Remember, we have evolved as human beings, but our bodies and our brains are still very primal. So even though we know we're not going to a cave, we know we're usually in our home, but that signal is still there to tell us that we need to be somewhere safe. So if you are starting to get those sensations and you're like, like things are starting to happen, and all of a sudden your partner is starting to get all excited, and it's like, okay, what do we do? Do we start doing some exercises? Or your doula, who has not followed the physiological process, maybe she was trained differently. Maybe she doesn't have the experience yet in actually sitting on her hands, or your midwife, and you start texting your midwife and saying, oh, things are happening. Guess what? Even if you're having a home birth, your midwife has to put you on the clock at the hospital. She has to notify somebody, especially if this is an integrated system. Because if she doesn't chart that, it can come back to her as a negative thing. She's going to get in trouble. So if you contact your midwife too early within the labor stages, what happens is now you're on the clock, and it might not actually be time, because if you are getting excitable within that early stage, instead of going to your safe cave, now your body is like, oh no, we're running, we're doing things, so obviously it's not safe to birth yet, so we're not going to ramp this up. So it's a counterproductive way that you're not going to actually go into labor. You're just going to ramp up those contractions, but nothing's going to happen. So then you're going to say, oh, I was in labor for 3 days and nothing was happening and my body didn't work. The truth is, you were just trying to do all the things. And it's not your fault that you were trying to do all the things. The problem is that it just keeps getting perpetuated over and over and over. How many times do you go into a mom group and you see the same question? Hey, I just started getting sensations, or I'm 39 weeks, or I'm 40 weeks. how do I get labor going? You don't. You don't. You leave it alone. Reclaiming childbirth as a rite of passage will actually show you what physiological birth actually looks like. And you'll start to understand what the actual purpose of early labor is. Okay? The next one is what they call the active labor stage. The way that they say it is that you're going to have contractions that are longer, stronger, and closer together, and your cervix is going to start to open. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're in full-blown labor, because your cervix could open a few centimeters and then close right back up. It could just be stretching to practice. And then all of a sudden, things will fizzle out. But you thought it was active labor. So you went to the hospital. You got assessed. They said you were 3 centimeters. You're like, how can I only be 3 centimeters when I was having these really strong contractions earlier? And what's going on? And they run Pitocin. They break your waters. They say your labor is not progressing. You end up in a C-section. Or they end up pulling your baby out with vacuum and forceps because your baby got stuck. The truth is that maybe your labor wasn't progressing because you needed to get a break. You were supposed to rest in early labor and you didn't. And now your labor is starting to progress a little bit, but now things are starting to shut down because you didn't get that rest. And from the medical perspective, it's you were in active labor and now you're not. So obviously something's wrong. The truth is that maybe you were in active labor to get things moving a little bit, maybe shift baby into a better position, maybe get your cervix to start to efface a little bit, which is thinning out. Maybe start to build up that fundal muscle of your uterus and just start to tone up, because your body knows that in a day or two, things are just going to go fast. And this is what happened to me, is I had a very early and progressing active labor for 24 hours. I got to 6 centimeters and then things shut down for 16 hours, in which case I was able to rest. I was able to eat. I was able to go inward and deal with whatever emotions were coming up and whatever fears were coming up. And as soon as that was done, as soon as I processed all that and I was back to my strength again, labor just kicked in. And then what happens is you go into the full progressing labor. And full progressing labor instead is you're going into a labor trance. I'm going to tell you right now, if you are having birth sensations and you are on the internet and you are texting people and you are asking your doula a whole bunch of questions and you are very talkative, you are not in progressing labor. You are still in your thinking brain. You are not yet in that primal mode that your body needs you to get into in order for labor to actually progress and for you to tune in to your actual body. This is another reason why getting past your fear is so important, and why hiring the right care provider is so important, and having the right support around you is so important. Because once you get into that space, you're not there anymore. You're in another world. So you're going to go into a trance, and there's not going to be very much pain. You're not even going to be aware of any pain. You might feel a little bit of pressure. You might feel some sensations, some waves coming on, but the pain, the fear, the tension will be gone. Now, if someone pulls you out of that because they're scared, or it's a care provider trying to get you to do a vaginal exam, what happens then is that, guess what? You've just been pulled out of your trance. You've been pulled out of your meditative state. And I can tell you from doing breath work and meditation that when you're pulled out of that state is very jarring. Well, in labor and birth, what that does is it automatically signals to your body, hey, wait a minute, we were nice and calm, but now there's a tiger in the area, so we need to shut things down. Do you see how this works? Like your body is actually dictating, this is what we need to do. We need to get into this trance. We need to focus. But if something comes up that scares us, we know it's not safe to birth, because again, your body does not know that you are in a hospital. It just senses the adrenaline coursing through your body and a tiger is chasing you, or a tiger is in the area. You're sniffing out a tiger, or you're sensing a tiger. and that is a problem. It's not safe for you to birth. So things are going to stop. Then we hit transition. And this is another one that people often, they mistake it. Sometimes transition feels more like active labor, especially if you were induced before with Pitocin, or if you just didn't have that really intense active labor and you were in such a trance that you didn't feel any pain. Suddenly transition feels like, oh, things are finally kicking in. At that point is when you start to think, I don't want to do this anymore. The good news is that you're pretty much done. Transition only lasts about like 2 minutes to 2 hours, depending on how many breast breaks you get. So mine lasts 2 minutes. So it's like big, strong, powerful contraction lasting 2 minutes long. And I'm like, I don't want to do this anymore. And then the water's released and baby's on their way out. That's transition for me. For my friends, transition can sometimes feel like their entire labor of 2 hours. So that's another way it can go, is that you suddenly have the most powerful contractions and you think, oh my God, like this is like really, really intense. That's a transition that's also what they call a precipitous labor. And that's basically, you're done. Once transition hits, like you're basically done. Baby is on their way out. It's when your uterus is now pushing down to get that baby out the last little bit. And that's going to take as long as it takes. And the more that you build up that sensation of safety and get those oxytocin receptors going, the better off you're going to be, because that's going to help your body to eject the baby. Finally, they talk about the pushing stage. Guess what? You don't actually have to have a pushing stage, because the pushing stage is more like the birthing stage of your uterus expelling the baby. And your uterus can do that all on its own. All you have to do is hold on for the ride, or rather not hold on, but let go, because you just surrender to it. The other thing is what's going to happen is you might not even realize that it's the pushing stage. You might think you're in transition, but instead of having the contractions that are just helping bring up the cervix and the cervical lip up that last few centimeters and really get that muscle going to push your baby down, suddenly you're going to start to have pushing contractions, which means that you're going to have a surge come up, and at the end, you start to push a little. Now, in the hospital, and the way that medical systems have been, they think, oh, you can't push yet. We haven't checked dilation. Well, guess what? You might start to have those pushing sensations when you're at 6 centimeters or 7 centimeters or 8 centimeters, depending on how your body needs you to help work with it. Because sometimes even just pushing that little bit helps open your cervix a bit more. So that's part of it, is helping move your baby down might be pushing. And you won't know that until you actually go through labor. The other one people get wrong is the afterbirth stage. And they say, well, the placenta has to be born by a certain point. No, it does not. It can take 10 minutes. It can take 5 minutes. It can take an hour. It might even take half an hour or an hour and a half. As long as you are not experiencing any heavy bleeding, and as long as you don't feel lightheaded, what's happening is your placenta is contracting enough to start passing that blood back to your baby, because there's 1/3 of your baby's blood inside that placenta. That's why babies are not super pink when they're born, and why if you cut the cord too soon on one baby and then you have the twin, if you have twins, and then the twin baby that was actually having the cord delayed, they are more pink than their sibling. Like, you can actually see this with twins. There's a picture that I found a while back where one cord was delayed and the other one was not for these twins. You want your baby to have all their blood. But the way that the medical system has been for so long is they cut the cord, or they'll say, oh, we'll delay the cord clamping, but only for 5 minutes. Or they'll say, oh, this should have been done by now, so now there's a problem and we're going to introduce oxytocin. No, as long as you are fine, and as long as that cord is pulsing still, oxygen is getting to your baby. This is also really helpful if your baby needs that extra oxygen because maybe they had a little bit of trauma on their way out. Maybe they were breech. Sometimes breech babies, they take a little bit longer to breathe, but that doesn't mean it's a problem because as long as they're attached to the placenta, they're not getting the oxygen through their lungs, they're getting it through the blood. So that attachment is actually really important. So you don't want cord traction. You don't want the shot of Pitocin in your leg. You want the physiological birth. Now I'm going to say something though. In order to have the physiological birth and have it unfold properly, you need to have the right mindset, the right education, the right environment is very crucial. You need to have the right facilitators who aren't going to disturb you and mess with your birth process. And you need to have the right support that's not going to make you feel fearful. If you don't have those things, it's a problem. So that's all I have for you today. And next week, we will be talking about labor trap number 7. And I'll talk to you soon.